So welcome back. We are going to take a look at which institution, Stanford or University of California, Berkeley, gets more government assistance. And that may sound like a strange question because University of California, Berkeley is a public university, right? And Stanford is a private university. I picked both of them randomly. I thought that it would be interesting to look at these two because I wanted to compare a public university to a private university, and I wanted them to both be selective and prestigious, and I wanted them to be about 30 miles apart and across a bay from each other. So randomly, I picked those two. First of all, let's start with a vote. And why don't you decide which, let's say A is Stanford and B is Berkeley. Now, which of those two gets more government assistance? Which do you suppose? A, Stanford, or B, Berkeley? Go. You can vote on this as well. Which is it, Stanford University or University of California, Berkeley? Which gets more government assistance? Okay, let's end the bidding and let's see what you think. A, Stanford, B, Berkeley. And what you think is Stanford. Is that what you thought too? Well, it stands to reason because Stanford is a private institution and Berkeley is a university that is public, the best public university in the world, as I've said before. But you see, that's a trigger for them. But let's take a look at the reality for a moment. Now, Berkeley gets $250 million a year of a direct subsidy from the state of California. That's what makes it a public university. We're defining public university the way most people define public universities. The state gives the university a certain amount of money. Now, Stanford, and Berkeley has 26,000 undergraduates, so we can make a very easy calculation on how much each undergraduate gets, in effect. The direct subsidy is $9,600 per undergraduate. Right? That's a simple mathematical calculation. Just keep it in mind. $9,600 from the taxpayers of California on average per every Berkeley student. And you ought to be grateful. Grateful to them. You are grateful, right? And then what about need? Well, we're using a measure of need, which is a Pell Grant. Pell Grants are available to students usually from relatively poor or quite poor families. And if you're Pell Grant eligible, you are quite poor by definition. And so 37% of our students are Pell Grant eligible in Berkeley. So I just wanted to throw that in. So it's $9,600 per student, and 37% of our students are eligible for Pell Grants. Doesn't mean they get them, but they would be eligible in terms of family background and family wealth. So right now, you've got the information you have and need on Berkeley. Let's take a look at Stanford, a private institution. It has $500 million a year, more than Berkeley in philanthropy. Can we get that into our heads? Stanford gets $500 million a year more than Berkeley in philanthropy. That is, people who are contributing to Stanford. Some of them are rich alumni, some of them are just rich. Now, that means that's a tax subsidy of $200 million more per year than Berkeley gets. When I say tax subsidy, what I mean is these people who are giving money to Stanford can get a charitable deduction on their income taxes. Remember, we talked about this? A charitable deduction is the equivalent of a government subsidy. I mean, for example, Marina von Whitman, a very, very wealthy individual, she gave a $30 million grant not that long ago to Princeton. And the tax subsidy, it's not that the $30 million came out of her pocket. She gave $30 million, but she deducted, presumably, I didn't look at her tax forms, but presumably she made that a charitable contribution, which meant that the federal government, in effect, paid $10 million, assuming her tax bracket, as I am, of that $30 million. So her out-of-pocket expenditures were $20 million, and the out-of-pocket government expenditures that government is not getting because of the charitable deduction is $10 million. Did everybody follow that? Do you follow what I just said, what I just did? So there is tax subsidy of $200 million more per year. Now there are 7,000 undergraduates at Stanford, which means the tax subsidy, which is government spending per student at Stanford, is $26,000 per year. Do you get it? You think that because you're a public university that you're subsidized by government to the tune of $9,600, and that sounds a lot, but actually Stanford students are getting a much bigger subsidy, $26,000 per undergraduate. And let's take a look at Pell Grants. There are 15% who are Pell Grant eligible. So do you see the point I'm getting at? This is a government subsidy that is much larger to an institution that has fewer students and fewer students of need. Is this fair? Is this fair, folks? And I don't mean to pick on Stanford. I'm using Stanford as an example. So here's a proposal, and I want you to think about it, and I want you to think about it. It's just one proposal that has been proposed in Congress, and that is donors to colleges and universities should be able to deduct their donations from their taxable incomes when at least 25% of the university students are eligible for Pell Grants. You see, we're limiting the charitable deduction for college. You can make a lot of charitable deductions elsewhere, but if you want to make a college charitable deduction and call it a charitable deduction and make it deductible from your income tax and get that kind of subsidy back, you have got to make sure that the college you are giving it to has at least 25% relatively low-income students. Now that's just a proposal. A, support, B, oppose. What do you think? What do you think? Go. Okay, let's take a look and let's stop the bidding and let's see where you are. Do you support or oppose? Well, 80% of you support. Now, I don't know if I did exactly the same question at Stanford, whether we'd have 80% support, but 20% of you did not want it, and I'm more interested right now in hearing from those of you who said no. Why did you say no? Yes? I'm sorry, say again?
We could create an admissions system where they'd be influenced to just make the 25% threshold.
So you could have an admissions system, you say, where they game it. So the admissions officers just make the 25% threshold, and they might have been higher before, but they just want to game it to the 25%. Any other people who voted against the proposal? Yeah, yes, all the way over there. You're going to have to shout a little bit.
I just don't think it's fair to just go ahead and take away tax deductions from individuals who are just doing good.
You don't think it's fair to take away a tax deduction from an individual who's doing good, who's basically saying, I'm making a contribution. Absolutely. Yes, but again, is there any, the response to, yes, go ahead. So you might have a sliding scale. Yeah. A sliding scale, a bigger deduction for schools that have more diversity of income. But just getting back to that point over there, the argument might be that a deduction is a government subsidy. So there's no right to have a government subsidy. It is a public policy decision as to what's going to be subsidized. And one thing that we are going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks is how taxes are utilized increasingly in public policy to encourage or discourage various activities that have a huge bearing and have a huge consequence for inequality, who gets what, and also the distribution of wealth in this country. So until next week, see you then.